All right, let's bring our guest into the show. We have joining us from Ukraine's capital, Kiev, Peter Zalmayev. He's the executive director of the Eurasia Democracy Initiative. In London, Alex Kokcharev, a principal research analyst at the risk consultancy IHS Markit. He specializes in Russia and Eastern Europe. And on the phone from Minsk, we have Riho Astapenia. He's the Robert Bosch Stiftung Academy Fellow at the Chatham House Institute in London. Welcome to you all. If I could start then with Riho in Minsk. Is this a turning point in Belarusian history?
Thanks a lot for having me. Firstly, I would like to apologize that I will be speaking slightly slower than usually as I haven't slept today. That night it was actually a key moment of Belarusian contemporary history, and it was really difficult to fall asleep. Anyway, the main takeaway of my talk is that actually Belarus has just plunged into its deepest political crisis. Lukashenko right now is very unpopular, and his yesterday's falsification of the election and use of army and police against Belarusians, they completely delegitimized him. It seems that by using the force, he will stay in power for some time, but tension between the authorities and the nation will continue, and I can expect that actually the retirement of Belarusians towards Lukashenko will be increasing. But anyway, we shouldn't expect any political change this year, I guess. The authorities are ready to use stun grenades and the other military equipment against ordinary citizens. The change cannot come quickly, just despite the fact that the majority of Belarusians want it.
Okay, let's bring in Alex, if we could, from London. So, Alex, listening to what Riho had to say there, don't expect any serious political change this year, he says. So, is the challenge to Lukashenko right now not that serious?
I think obviously what we have seen this year is that there is significant political mobilization against Lukashenko and against his government. However, because Lukashenko controls the elites, he controls the electoral commissions, and crucially, he controls the police and the security services. I think by using all these methods, he will be likely to stay in power. We have seen that his re-election has been recognized by a number of powerful foreign players, particularly by Russia and by China. And with this external support, he will be able to use the state apparatus which is in his disposal in order to keep power in Belarus.
Peter, then, do you expect protests to grow? Are we looking at something that's going to be snuffed out very quickly or something that will grow with time?
Well, it is difficult to predict. So far, in the quarter of a century, Belarusians have not shown sufficient courage, alas, to unthrone or dethrone Lukashenko. And this time, they're saying that they will. So we have seen the call go out on the internet that's flickering in and out. As you know, it was shut down yesterday, but there's still some sporadic connection. People are able to connect through sporadically, not only by phone, but through Telegram and other social networks. And they are calling for a national strike starting tomorrow, but also at the same time, daily 7 p.m. rallies around the country. If they are able to gather sufficient force in the regions, that may spell trouble for Lukashenko, because, mind you, their security services and their special forces are also limited. They have all been obviously taken to Minsk, and they're left quite a series of regional centers abandoned, pretty much. If the opposition musters sufficient force in the regions, then Lukashenko will be spread very thin on the ground, and this may tip over. So I wouldn't rule out the opposition yet, but at the same time, it is Lukashenko's, at this point of the game, it is Lukashenko's game to lose.
All right, so a key point perhaps is to watch the regions. Riho, you are in, of course, Belarus. What is your take on the state of the opposition in the regions?
Well, actually, it's a very tricky question. Is that actually this campaign is very, very different. There is no such thing as opposition. It's just a crowdsourcing system of people who really would like to have a new president. That's actually a huge challenge for Lukashenko himself, because he doesn't know with whom he should fight. Because actually there are so many initiatives, different people from the private companies, from non-commercial sector, many journalists, creative people are joining the movement against Lukashenko. So actually there is no such thing as traditional opposition. It's just a very, very huge movement of people who really just would like to...
Who is leading it then, Rihor? Who is leading the protests? Who is leading the calls for a strike? I mean, is it being led by the political opposition we know, or some other figures, or is this a very organic movement arising through the internet?
Well, that's also interesting question. It's actually, the protest was announced by a 22-year-old blogger who is living in Warsaw. He is the most popular blogger in Belarus, and he just announced it, and people just followed. And actually, what is striking right now is that actually no one really cares about a blogger or even about Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, because actually everyone just would like to have a new president. That's why people just follow anything they see. And that's why this, for example, yesterday's protest was just really announced by this blogger. And Svetlana Tikhanovskaya actually didn't participate in it. And actually, she is not going to participate in any protest, as far as I understand.
That's interesting. Alex, then, how much power does the formal opposition really have then, whether it's Ms. Tikhanovskaya or some of the other figures which were running for elections?
Well, Tikhanovskaya was the face of a protest vote, so she wasn't opposition in the traditional sense, meaning that she was part of an established political party or political movement with an ideological platform. So she's quite different. Her candidacy was largely accidental, and she became a reluctant face of the protest vote. And fundamentally, she decided to run on a platform of becoming an interim head of state and to hold another election within the next 6 months, which would be free and fair and open to anyone who wants to take part in it. So she's not part of the established opposition, which in case of Belarus is traditionally linked to issues of identity politics, which resonates only with certain parts of society, but not wide social groups and classes, which find Tikhanovskaya with her platform appealing.
So in a sense, could we say, perhaps, Peter, that we're seeing a realignment of political forces? As Alex said there, the more traditional political forces are arranged around identity politics. Are we seeing the current opposition rise above that sort of classification?
Well, indeed, and I have to tip my hat to our Minsk-based colleague who did say correctly that this is not the opposition in the classical sense, and I mentioned it, and I said opposition, but in a very loose sort of way, because true enough, the entire country seems to be in opposition to Lukashenko. I tend to believe that the independent pollsters have it right, and it is in fact the polar opposite. The polling figures are the polar opposite of what Lukashenko reported. It seems that Tikhanovskaya beat him by a landslide, and and it just shows you that you could have run a house cat against Lukashenko. Once again, I agree with my colleague, and he would have won. Indeed, identity politics are not what concerns Belarusians now. You have to keep in mind, and you mentioned it in your intro, that the guy has been in power for over a quarter of a century. So essentially, Belarus went straight from the Soviet Union to a one-man, strongman's rule, never really knowing democracy the way its counterparts in the region have had. The Baltic states, Moldova, Ukraine. So for them, this is going to be a new experience. They're tired of the old sclerotic rule of Mr. Lukashenko. They're tired of, I would use the analogy, driving a beat-up old Volkswagen Jetta. They want to sit behind the wheel of a Tesla. They want to modernize. They're seeing that this government is unable to provide for them. This government has been characterized by a very inept response to the coronavirus. But herein lies the potential pitfall, because it seems that the opposition, once again, the people who have risen up against Lukashenko may be discounting the problem of Russia. And that is the elephant in the room.
Hang on, before we get to Russia, Peter, let me jump in and present perhaps the narrative that we're getting from the officials there and authorities there. And, you know, their line is basically that we're seeing opposition figures. It's not a simple case of a democratic uprising taking place. These are opposition figures, as officials have tried to cast them, as being manipulated by outside powers. And to use your analogy, you won't be driving a Tesla, you won't be driving at all, because the alternative to Lukashenko is a lot of instability, which foreign powers ultimately want for Belarus. That's the official line. How do you respond to that, Peter?
Well, you know what? We don't really know, but it seems that it's very, very possible it may come out that at least some of the candidates, including those who were thrown in jail, may have harbored secret sympathies or made secret deals with Russia. Mr. Babariko, for example, the one who's in jail, he was in fact in charge of a corporation that was affiliated with the Gazprom, the Russian oil giant. So these things are unknowns for now, and the Belarusian, the current leaders, such as they may be, I've spoken with them. I spoke with them here on the streets of Kiev when they were protesting last night outside of the Belarusian embassy, and they said we're staying away from any messaging vis-a-vis Russia, which tells me that, there's much we still don't know. And the group of Wagner soldiers or the Wagner agents that you mentioned that were arrested, that may also be turn out to be a special operation either by the Russians or by Lukashenko himself to try to portray himself as the sole guarantor of Belarusian independence. There are just simply too many unknowns for us to have a clear picture of what's going on and what Russia's goal is in all of this.
All right, let's try and make the picture a little clearer with regard to the sentiment of those protesters, at least who have come out on the streets against the president. And Rihor, what has galvanized the sentiment of those people so much against this president? Is it all down to his handling of the coronavirus?
Well, I guess that there are actually three main reasons why these protests are so numerous. The first one is probably that people are just tired of Lukashenko. Many people who are protesting, they're actually of my age. They're around 30. And myself, I was born when Lukashenko became president. When Lukashenko became president, I was 4 years old. And I actually stayed almost all my life so far with him. And many people in Belarus are really tired of that. The second reason, I guess, is that the Russian economy was stagnating for the last 10 years, and it is obvious that many people are just disappointed with their quality of life, with their level of life. They just feel that other countries like Poland, like Lithuania, they're developing. They have more prospects, while Belarus have less and less prospects each year. And actually, it was one of the ideas of Tikhanovska's campaign that actually with Lukashenko, Belarus has no prospect. And that it seems to be true. And that's why people are following her. At least they just would like to vote for her. And the third reason is just the mismanagement of the COVID-19 pandemic in Belarus. Lukashenko just made everything to make people angry at him. He called the pandemic a psychosis. He blamed doctors for spreading the virus. He called people for being obese. That's why they were susceptible to the virus. So his mismanagement during the pandemic made everyone in Belarus to understand that actually he just doesn't really care about the economy. He doesn't care even about the health of the people. That's why people became very angry this summer and this spring.
All right, let's take some of those points. And Alex, the Belarusian economy, as Rihor pointed out, it has weakened, hasn't it? I mean, we've gone from a situation where it had growth of over 10%, annual growth of over 10% in the early 2000s, and now it's projected to shrink 4%, I think, this year. Why has the economy worsened so much?
Well, in the recent years, the economy didn't do particularly well, and this is largely due to the fact that there have been no structural reforms. The economy is still dominated by large-scale state-owned manufacturing enterprises, and the state fundamentally dominates the many sectors of the economy, from agriculture to manufacturing. There are some bright spots in the services sector, which has been really badly hit by the coronavirus pandemic. Despite the fact that Belarus didn't introduce any lockdown measures or social distancing rules, but the people obviously reacted to the fact that there is this healthcare situation going on, and they've adjusted their behavior. And as a result, the services sector, which was much more vibrant and mostly privately owned, has been quite badly hit by it. With the government not wishing to reform the economy further, obviously the prospects for growth are very limited. And I completely agree with Rihor. The living standards in Belarus have been largely stagnant in the past 10 years. And this is one of the factors which drives people to these protests.
All right. What hasn't been stagnant is the relationship with Russia. And Peter, as you explained, we've heard the president come out and accuse the Wagner Group of conducting illicit operations in the country. Does this offer an opening for the West to increase its influence and leverage? And does that mean that Belarus will have little opportunity but to align itself perhaps closer with the West now?
Well, and just to piggyback on what our colleague just said, to add another element to Belarus's economic woes that we're witnessing. It's in the last 2 years, Putin basically cut its oil and gas subsidies to Belarus. And I think, honestly, that is the main, and that's the most proximate factor responsible for the downfall of the Belarusian economy, the precipitous kind of decline that we've been witnessing. Well, and yes, coming back to the situation of the Wagner Group, that seems to be a gambit by Lukashenko, whether it was orchestrated by him, whether it was, once again, we don't know exactly what they were doing, whether they were indeed en route to Istanbul. But it's yet another example how Lukashenko has been balancing between Russia and the West, and he's trying to convince the West he's the sole guarantor of Belarusian sovereignty against Russia's encroachment. For the EU now is a moment of truth. They lifted in 2016 their sanctions against Belarus, and now, after several statements by European politicians that they probably will not recognize the legitimacy of the elections, they are facing another stark choice. Will they reimpose these elections? And if they do, what next? Will they serve a closer binding between Lukashenko and Putin as a result, and lose Belarus altogether? That is a very, very difficult question. The Baltic states are saying they're going to be working with the opposition closer. Some Ukrainian lawmakers are saying they're considering declaring Lukashenko illegitimate. So once again, it's a very, very confusing chessboard we're facing, and Europe does not have many advantageous moves.
It is a very confusing chessboard. Let me go back to Alex in London. What do you think is the calculation that most Western powers are going to make out of this? Are they going to put their principles and care for democracy first, or are going to say, hey, we can't let a country slip closer to Russia?
Well, I think it will be very difficult for EU countries to ignore what is happening in Belarus, particularly if we're going to see more violence by the police and security services towards peaceful protesters in the coming days. There have been already calls to introduce political sanctions against Belarusian leadership weeks before the election, because hundreds have been arrested prior to the election. And now with this renewed violence, and with the fact that there are obviously questions about legitimacy of the election and legality of the status of the president, there will be even more calls for this. We know that some of the neighboring countries, particularly Poland and Lithuania, are calling for urgent meeting of the European Council, and I think they will be urging certain actions by the EU in order to prevent further violent scenarios in Belarus.
Okay, Riho, the president, of course, has a lot of power, but there are others in the picture, right? There are networks associated with Lukashenko. There are the Soviet-era bureaucrats. How do you see the centers of power figuring out where they which direction they push the country right now?
Well, it seems that the law enforcement and security agencies are the most powerful in the country, and they're very happy about having an opportunity right now to prove their effectiveness and their necessity, needness for Lukashenko, and that he has to use them, and he makes and it's why he's supposed to pay, them after for that. So he's very dependent on them, and as far as I see, they just want to split the economy between themselves and to receive some benefits somewhere else from it. And that's it. That's how they see their future. At the same time, if we speak about other ministries and institutions within the system, it seems that actually many people are trying to leave right now. And it seems that not so many competent leaders are actually there are inside the system. And my fear is that actually things will become even much worse in the economy because, well, for example, we have a prime minister who is responsible for the economy, but he actually had no real experience in the economy. He was working in a security agency. For example, the head of the presidential administration, he was also from the security agency. So basically, we have the power of people from the security agencies, and it seems that what they really know how to do is just to repress the people. But actually, how to develop the country, it seems a too difficult issue for them.
I think we can all agree there are some really challenging times ahead for Belarus. We've got to leave it there for now, though. Let's thank our guests very much, Peter Zalmayev, Alex Kokcharev, and of course, joining us on the phone, Riho Estepenia. Thank you for watching this show too. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, head over to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle there is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Sami Zaidan, and the whole team here, for now, it's goodbye.